the serious warning before engaging on any work on this or any other PCP gun. Remove the cylinder. Don't do any work with the cylinder attached, even if you think it's down to a fairly low pressure. The forces at work with a cylinder at 200 bars just don't bear thinking about. So please, be safe. Watch all the videos on YouTube carefully before starting your work. Okay, lecture over. Let's get on with it. Right, I've reassembled the firing valve again, and this time it's holding pressure. Now there's two possibilities come to mind. One is that the spring pressure behind the firing valve isn't enough to completely seal it. So if you, as I was doing, very gently filling the cylinder from completely empty, the spring pressure alone isn't quite enough to get that perfect seal on the firing valve, and air leaks. Whereas if you're a little bit more aggressive with filling the cylinder and allow the air to flow in faster, there's some air pressure as well behind the valve driving it into the seat and making the seal. So that's one possibility, and I think it's probably right. Another thing though that I did is the small brass bush that sits on the end of the valve stem acts as a guide to that the valve runs through. I wondered whether one surface, one end of it, may be actually machined not flat but concave, and with my eyesight I can't really tell whether I'm barking up the wrong tree or not. But it did occur to me that if one side of that, one end of that brass bush is slightly machined just a tiny little bit concave, when it seats onto the PTFE O-ring, it would allow the valve itself to travel further into the breech block and make a firmer contact on the valve. And we may be talking only a thou or two of an inch, but that could make the difference. Anyway, happy days. It is apparently sealing at the moment, so I can continue and put more pressure into the cylinder, take the cylinder up above the desired regulator pressure, or as I increase it I'll be watching this regulator pressure come up as well, and hopefully that is going to stop something short of my desired figure, which is about 90 bar. I think I'll just try and stay on the low side of 90 bar, but let's see how we get on. I'll start increasing the cylinder pressure. Right, there's the regulator pressure. So the cylinder pressure was still going up, but the regulator stopped there about 40 bar. So that's a good sign that the regulator is operating there, and I can adjust it. So I'll take the cylinder pressure, the pressure in the cylinder here, above the desired 90 bar, because obviously the regulator can't do its thing if it doesn't have enough cylinder pressure. So I'll take that up a little bit further. Sorry this is taking time, but I always fill the cylinder slowly because of the heat build-up, and I think I can actually feel that in the aluminium of the... Right, so I've taken the cylinder up to 120 bar, so I know that there's sufficient pressure to set the regulator now at my desired figure, which is going to be on the low side of 90 hopefully. So just remove the fill line. Right, I'm going to start to increase the regulator pressure now and watch the gauge. So I'll be operating this, tightening it, so I'll be turning clockwise now and hopefully see the regulator pressure start to go up, and it is. I'm trying to do this a bit cack-handed so I can keep some light on the subject. Now what I'm doing here when I'm turning this Allen key is I'm compressing those Belleville washers that we talked about earlier, and that forms a very strong spring, so it's applying spring pressure onto the back of the piston, which operates the inlet valve. So I'm doing this very tentatively. I'll see if I can speed it up maybe. Now, looks to me like I'm reading only 60, 70. Don't want to go too fast now. The adjustment of course becomes progressively more rapid as I tighten the spring pressure, so I'm going to do this very gently now. I'm at 80. Didn't seem to move up as I tighten that last one piece. I just slightly confused because I should have enough air pressure in there. The gauge on my cylinder, my dive tank, was saying 120 bar, and the gauge on the end of the A&M cylinder is saying 140 bar. Well, 130 bar maybe. So they should be enough. So I'm a bit confused why it hasn't gone up as I've done that last turn in, but I'll try a little bit more maybe. Oh yeah, it is still going up. Okay, so I'm now at 85 bar. I don't want it too high because I want to get the maximum shot count I can, and I don't want to be wasting air. I'll just take a little bit more to get to the bottom of that 90 line. So as I read that now, it looks to be just shy of 90, so I'll stop at that point, and that's the first go at setting the regulator pressure. Now I need to put the two halves of the action back together, put the barrel in obviously and the trigger unit, and then we can start testing the regulator and see how it's refilling. And I'm just hoping that the issues I had in the past have gone, and that when the hammer strikes the valve, when the hammer strikes onto that valve, it will in fact open and propel the pellet. So let's see. Okay, I've just mated the two halves of the action back together, the regulator at the front and the hammer action at the back. You can't really go wrong. There's a series of I think 3 lugs that engage with the block, and it's just a matter then of tightening up the cap head screws. I'm still cursing the fact that I can't find those flipping ball-headed Allen keys, which would make this job a lot smoother. If I seem a bit more cack-handed than your average punter, then it's because I'm trying to work over the top of the camera. Okay, now I just must nip those fairly tight. Now replace the trigger block. And that is that. It's back together and ready to start testing. So with the gun serviced and reassembled, it's time to start the pressure testing, and I need to remove the plug covering the regulator pressure test port. Now this is the aftermarket plug from HW100 tuning, and I'll put links to them down below. And before anybody asks, no, I don't have any connection with HW100 tuning. My only connection is as a customer, having purchased their excellent kit of O-rings for the full service. Now the only downside with this is that the O-ring that sits on the end of this threaded plug has remained in the hole. It would be just one little modification I would suggest they could do, is if it could be machined so that there was a lip into which the O-ring sat, and so it was retained on the plug when you removed it. That would be a worthwhile mod. I'll just use a cocktail stick to hopefully fish it out easily enough. Yeah, so there it's out, and I'll just put it back onto the end of the plug ready. You see what I mean? If that actually engaged in a lip, it'd have a chance of staying on when you removed it. It would just save the faff of having to fish it out with a cocktail stick. And then here's the gauge, the gauge I purchased from that same company, and again I'll put the link down below, and this attaches onto that port. Now they do warn, and it's fairly obvious really, don't use the body of the gauge to act as your lever for turning it in. Pinch it up with an appropriately sized spanner. I haven't got spanners to hand at the moment, so I'm just going to finger tighten it. When I go out and fit the cylinder, I'll find the spanner, but don't lever on the body. Well, I've still got problems, but they're not quite the problems I thought I had. I didn't film this, but if you remember, I had adjusted the regulator so that it had risen up to 90 bar. And I then assembled the two halves of the action, put the trigger unit on and fired the gun. The regulator pressure fell to about, well, actually I had the gauge down for the first time I fired, so it probably fell to something like 50 or 60 bar. I fired it again, watching it, and it dropped to 40 bar, progressively down, and I fired I think 5 times, and it's just stepped down each time until the regulator is now empty. There's no air there behind the, or very little air there behind the firing valve. So there's still an issue with air getting into the regulator. What we've seen is the regulator charge up, and that reservoir of air inside at 90 bar has just been depleted with each firing. So my thoughts now, well, to go back to my original problem, which caused me to start stripping the gun down in the first place, was that I thought the regulator had failed and was allowing cylinder pressure air into this reservoir, and so the firing valve had got cylinder pressure air behind it and the hammer couldn't open the valve. That was my thoughts. It now looks like I've got that completely wrong, and in fact the inlet valve is my guess. That brass inlet valve has failed, and although it initially operated as I reassembled the gun and air did flow in, and I was able to increase the pressure of the springs, if you recall, driving the piston forward, which closes off that valve, and it closed it off at 90 bar, but hasn't since let any air out of the cylinder. Now I'm going to have to remove the cylinder, which will empty the cylinder completely and probably mangle the main valve O-ring. Hey ho, but at least I feel now I'm making progress, and having the gauge fitted and being able to understand that. I wish I'd filmed that section so that you could have seen with each firing, but it's quite loud of course indoors. But with no pellet, I hasten to add, I'm just operating the gun, just driving air down through the barrel. But with no silencer on and indoors, it's quite a crack. But so it did just step down as you'd expect, with no actual air flowing in to refill the regulator as I was expecting to see. Hey ho, onwards and upwards. At least we're understanding a little bit more about what's happening now, and I don't feel like I'm working quite so blind as I was when I came up with my original theory. Right, I'll get cracking. We'll see you later. Right, I've already loosened off the inlet valve with a wrench, and I'm just now extracted all the way out. The good thing of course is that you can actually get to this end of the inlet of the regulator assembly. This is the inlet valve, and if I can bring the lamp around a little bit more, hopefully we'll be able to see down in there that there's the piston of the regulator, and there's the plunger on the end of the piston, and that plunger fits into this hole on the end of the inlet valve and should force open the inlet valve. So I'm hoping that this is the issue. I haven't seen anybody else strip this down, but I shall have a go at separating the two halves and find out if it's possible to do any sort of repair on this. If not, then I'll be buying a new inlet valve and trying that, because that's my hope. That's the seat of my issues, but we'll see. It's surprised me so far, and I'm sure there's still a few more surprises to come in this rebuild. There's the end of the inlet valve, and taking the 1.5 millimeter Allen key, which is just a snug fit. It'll go in, and comes to a halt, but then you can feel it operating under pressure there. So I'm a bit bemused now. What can be the problem? Next thing is, you can see it's got this 8mm nut at the top and the 10mm nut at the bottom, so that's where the two halves of the regulator, of the inlet valve rather, are going to separate. Of course, I've never seen anybody take one of these apart on the tube before, so I think we're on unknown territory here. Right, I'm ready to have a go at opening up this inlet valve. And we need a 10mm and an 8mm spanner. I've pre-loosened this to make my life as easy as possible. Now, I'm not sure what's going to happen here, because clearly there's spring pressure involved, so we may end up with bits flying everywhere, but let's just see if we can take this apart and find out how the inlet valve operates. Okay, so as I suspected, there's a ball at the bottom. There it is. It's all a bit dirty, but I'm still at a bit of a loss to understand. I can see right through it. There. So I'm at a bit of a loss to understand why it's not operating. But I'll give it a clean anyway and put it back together. But yeah, don't fully understand this one at the moment, but I'll persevere, and if I get any thoughts other than debris, I mean, it looks a little bit dirty, but most of that seems to be a silicone grease that's in there. There's not any large pieces of debris that I can see anyway, which was my initial thought, but anyway, I'll have a look, and if I come up with anything other than cleaning, putting it back together and trying again, I'll come back on. Here's the main inlet valve disassembled and wiped clean. The cylinder attaches at this end. Cylinder pressure passes through that section. There's a small spring that's holding a ball bearing against a polyurethane O-ring inside this end, and the plunger on the end of the regulator piston enters the hole there and pushes in, and pushing that valve back away from the seat, and air can then flow through from the cylinder into the regulator. When the air pressure in the regulator reaches the pressure, which is controlled by that set of Belleville springs, the piston will close. There is a replacement O-ring supplied in the kit, the major service kit from HW100 Tuning. I'd confused it because it's very similar to the main inlet valve O-rings, which actually go on that point there, and I thought it was another of those, but no, it's a totally different O-ring, just looks very similar. So I'll be replacing that one into the inlet valve, giving it a clean and reassembling, and we'll see if this fixes the problem. But I'm finding it hard to believe that this is actually going to fix the problem, but hey ho, we live and learn. To reassemble the inlet valve, then I'm putting the new polyurethane O-ring in. See that down in the bottom. Maybe that's it. Can feel that seat all the way down then. The steel ball, if I can pick it up without dropping it. Dropping the steel ball in. And then there's the spring, and I'll just give that a wipe over with GT85, a damp cloth with GT85 on before putting it in. Okay, the spring goes inside the other end. Snip that up tight. And there it is, assembled, ready to go back into the end of the regulator. Before I do that though, I'm just going to double check that the piston, the regulator piston down at the bottom, is free to move. All I did then was put a pair of long nose pliers down inside, catch hold of the plunger end of the piston, and yeah, it's sliding without issue, so I don't think that's the problem, unless it's sticking in some way that I can't understand at the moment. So. Refit the cylinder again and try again and see how the regulator performs this time. certain feeling of Groundhog Day coming into this rebuild at the moment. I seem to be going over the same ground again and again. At least it will be interesting to see if we get that same thing happen with the air leaking past the firing valve if I very slowly introduce air to the cylinder from into the main side. So air's flown into the cylinder, through that inlet valve and into the regulator assembly and up to the regulator test port, and it should stop when it gets round to 90. I'll keep an eye on the cylinder pressure as well on the tank. Anyway, it seems to have stopped at about 87, 86, 87. I'll take the tank up to say 120, something like that. Just going to introduce the barrel. I can't tighten the barrel into position, but at least it will help control some of the bark. When I fire it, going to be quite loud, I'm afraid. Wow. Regulator came straight back up to pressure. Just make sure that wasn't a fluke. Now straight back up to pressure. It's not instantaneous, you can see the pressure come back up and stabilise, but so far it's quick. So it's certainly behaving differently to the regulator in the excellent video or series of videos by Sebastian Hibbert, and in that we could see his regulator come back up really quite slowly. Now, given the problem that I've had where my regulator didn't come back up after firing, after initially filling, I have to say, it's a slightly unusual one. It seems that it's turned out it was that internal polyurethane O-ring inside the inlet valve that you just saw me replace. That seems to have been the cause of my problem, and I'm thinking it's probably the same reason that Sebastian found that his regulator came up slowly. But you can see that comes up really quite fast. Well, what can I say? I'm delighted that I seem to have I've got this far on the rebuild now. It's been frustrating at times, and some of that is down to the fact that I'm struggling to understand exactly how the gun works as I go along. But I think I do now understand it. I've been trying to convey that as I go along. if I get the chance, I'll see if I can construct a small diagram, more of a schematic type diagram to show how the regulator works, how it controls the flow of compressed air in from the cylinder through that inlet valve, how it's regulated, how it passes up to the firing valve, and I think that may help you in the future. So yeah, I'm feeling slightly chuffed and wondering what can go wrong next actually, but I hope I'm on the way to getting the gun back together, and I definitely will do the chrono work though, because it's essential to ensure that after any work on the regulator or the hammer assembly here, that the gun remains within the legal 12 foot-pound limit in the UK. After making repeated firings on the gun, the regulator is still performing accurately. I can't really see any change. It might be possibly 1 bar difference over all of these shots that I've taken. I can see on the gauge, and to me it looks like it's just north of 85 bar. I'd say 87 bar, but of course I don't know the calibrated accuracy of this gauge. However, I think I'm going to leave it at that rather than increase it, because the lower the regulator pressure I can run, the higher the shot count I'm going to achieve, and the less likely that this gun is going to be overpower. My next move is going to be to run it over a chrono, just to give myself reassurance that it is in fact below the 12 foot-pound limit, and then when I get a chance, I think I am a well-known pedant, and I'm quite interested to spend some time just playing with tiny adjustments on the regulator pressure and plotting that over a shot string to see the difference it will make in the number of usable shots and the muzzle energy. I don't personally want to get into changing the hammer spring unless I can't achieve a legal muzzle energy, and preferably around 750 feet per second, 780 feet per second at the muzzle, using JSB exact 8.4s. So thanks to everybody that's given me the encouragement to attempt this rebuild. Principally Sebastian Hibbert, Kubli Cat, and a multitude of others that have shared their experience on YouTube. Thanks also to HW100tuning.co.uk. All of the seals that you've seen me use so far, plus the Pro Buffer O-ring, which I'll use when I open up and degrease the hammer side of the action. There's the magazine seal, the O-ring that runs around the magazine, keeps the pellets in place. Cylinder clamp, which is of no use to me actually, because I run the barrel free floating. And then 4 O-rings that fit the 2 of them go onto the quick fill probe and 2 on the dust plug. And then there's breech seals for 0.22 and 0.20, which again are no use to me. I've got a 177 gun. There's 3 of the main inlet valve, which is one of the most common leaks, just there where that tiny little one on the end of the brass inlet valve. That's subject to wear with taking the cylinder on and off, particularly of course if you haven't got a quick fill, and a couple of sachets of molly coat, and that all of those seals for the whole major service kit were, I think, £6.50. And the great thing is that every one of them comes in a labelled bag. Now, I'm sure that you can buy them in bulk and get a lower cost if you intend to be rebuilding your gun every year or so. It may be worth investing and going down that route. But for simplicity, for pure ease, I think this kit of parts represents fantastic value for money, and just makes life so much easier, and that's what it's all about. And now next I'll be removing the taking the cylinder off, of course, first. And just worth saying again before I wrap up, please be safety conscious. Don't do anything silly. Never work on the gun when it's pressurised. Always remove the air cylinder. Don't take any chances, you'll come to grief. So I'll be removing that regulator after depressurising the gun and fitting that new brass plug which replaces the HW100 hex grub screw and ball valve arrangement. Okay, thanks, bye for now, and hopefully I'll make some future videos on the strip down of the hammer side of the action and some of the chrono work. Right, bye for now. There she is, back in the stock and scope on, ready to go off to the range for a bit of chrono work and zeroing. Happy shooting, everybody. Bye for now.